Yes.
Awesome. Okay, so thanks very much for the opportunity to speak to your group today. My name is Dr. Clifton Otto, and I entitled the talk for today, Parkinson's is Cannabis, of course, very appropriate for your group, based upon the request of some of your members, and it's an opportunity to be able to talk on this subject. Just want to give you a few disclosures. I am a certifying physician for Hawaii's medical cannabis program. I am not a member of or consultant for any dispensary, and I do not have any financial interests to disclose in this presentation. This presentation is for information, educational purposes only. I'm not providing medical advice, and I'm not a lawyer, so I would suggest that if you have any questions about the medical use of cannabis, that you consult with a lawyer on these legal issues. Just a little bit about my background. I am a cannabinoid medicine specialist, which means that I have been certified by the board of the American Academy of Cannabinoid Medicine to practice cannabinoid medicine. I was also a member of the Hawaii Dispensary Task Force, which came up with recommendations for creating a regulated distribution system for cannabis for medical use in Hawaii. I formerly trained as an ophthalmologist, actually, and used to travel to the Big Island every week to take care of our diabetic retinopathy and macular degeneration patients before the pandemic started. So now I'm focusing more on being at home and using telehealth. I also have a background in chemistry at a pharmaceutical company on the East Coast, and I worked at the Manoa in their natural products chemistry division looking for bioactive compounds in marine organisms. I first got interested in this subject of medical cannabis because of a friend who had colorectal cancer. And I was able to see firsthand how the medical use of cannabis helped this person in terms of pain relief, nausea reduction, appetite stimulation. I believe that it was because of the medical use of cannabis that this friend was actually able to survive the grueling chemotherapy and surgery, which I think otherwise would have wiped out this person's immune system and caused other secondary infections. I then went on to look at some of the research that's been done on cannabis, and I was surprised that there's been quite a bit of research done over the years, a lot done back in the 70s actually, before this whole thing got clamped down by the war on drugs. And then I started looking at our medical cannabis program and the laws surrounding that program. And that's when I became a bit of an advocate for our patients, because there are a lot of things that need improving in order to protect the rights of our patients and make sure that they have safe access to cannabis. As you can see, our Medical Use of Cannabis Act went into effect June 14th, 2000. So this program has been active for over 20 years now. Actually, it started in December of 2000. So we're right about at 20 years. And this, I wanted to show you to give you an idea of the intent of the original state lawmakers who crafted this law. And this says the legislature further finds that allowing the medical use of marijuana could promote Hawaii as being an international center for medical treatment and research. And I think that's quite visionary, considering when that was written, and I'm hoping that's something that we can achieve in the future. So I really appreciate the opportunity to speak on this subject. I have several patients with Parkinson's disease who are reporting anecdotal evidence of improvement in some of their symptoms. And so I started my research for this talk with your local organization, Hawaii Parkinson Association. And I really appreciated all the information on there, but I noticed that there really wasn't anything that I came across that dealt with the possible use of cannabis for Parkinson's disease. I did appreciate, though, this list of cardinal signs: resting tremor, bradykinesia, muscle rigidity, postural instability, because looking at the possible use of cannabis for Parkinson's disease, I think shows us that it could have varying effects depending on which particular symptom you're trying to address. I also thought it was interesting on the Parkinson's Foundation website that they do address medical marijuana, and they actually have a Center of Excellence network where they bring together experts from 47 different medical centers around the world to come up with ideas and guidance on different subjects. And they actually did a survey where they looked at physicians' expectations on how cannabis may affect different symptoms. And I thought it was very interesting. Some of these, the columns in blue are where they expected some type of improvement. Red is where they thought it could worsen, and green is where they weren't sure if it did anything. But I thought it was interesting that some of these symptoms, such as balance and bradykinesia and fatigue, were considered to either have no effect or possibly be worsened. If you look at tremor, it was kind of 50-50. But keep in mind that only about 23% of these physicians surveyed actually had any formal training in the medical use of cannabis. So I'm not sure exactly where they are coming up with their expectations. But the foundation did put forth a consensus statement on the use of medical cannabis for Parkinson's disease, which I reviewed, and I found generally to be very helpful. I thought kind of a nice starting point for Parkinson's patients who are considering the medical use of cannabis. But as I was going through it, I came up with an interesting section on page 14, which falls under the obtaining medical cannabis through a dispensary section. And this sentence really struck me. It says, you should work with the person at the dispensary to find products that may fit your symptoms. And I put a red box around this, a red warning box, because I do not believe that this is the way that patients should interact with dispensary staff. Dispensary staff are not medical professionals. They are trained in HIPAA, or how to maintain confidential medical information. And in my opinion, giving out information on product selection and on dosages constitutes medical advice and should only be done by the certifying physician. And so I'm probably going to write to the foundation and just ask that they might want to consider revising this section. I think it should contain wording that says that patients should contact their certifying provider if they have any questions about how to use cannabis for their Parkinson's symptoms. And hopefully the dispensary would direct the patient back to their certifying provider so that there could be a feedback loop between the certifying physician, the patient, and the dispensary. And so then I took a look at some of the research that's online, and those of you who have researched this subject have probably found that there are various articles out there. I think in general, the conclusion is that medical marijuana hasn't really been shown to produce significant improvement in various symptoms. There may be some improvement in mood and appetite, and so that's kind of the institutional perspective right now. But when I talk to Parkinson's patients who are telling me that there's unmistakable improvement in some of their symptoms, in this case, a 70-plus-year-old Parkinson's patient who was diagnosed over 10 years ago with significant resting tremor, tried smoking some cannabis with a friend in private, and after one large inhalation, tremors completely resolved within 30 seconds. And so that is clear anecdotal evidence of improvement. This is usually the starting point for medical investigation into these types of findings. And so I was immediately struck with several questions in my mind. You know, what kind of material was this patient using? How strong was it in terms of THC or CBD or other chemicals in cannabis? How was it grown? Was it organically grown? Were there other pesticides that were used? So there are various safety issues that come up as well. And, you know, ideally, there would be some type of perfect material that was available. I put in here Parkinson's Delight just as a little bit of a joke, because once you start looking at some of these products, there are all kinds of crazy names to these different cultivars, Girl Scout Cookie, Skywalker OG. You would not believe the names that have been assigned to different varieties of cannabis. But unfortunately, it's not like a pharmaceutical medication where you can say, okay, you go to this particular product, 95% of patients respond in a certain manner, and so this is the thing for you. Cannabis, from what I've seen, is probably one of the most challenging and most highly individualized medicines out there. And this is due to a high degree of multifactorial variability in terms of individual constitution of the patient, in terms of what are their cannabis receptors in their central nervous system, how are they composed, how sensitive are they to cannabinoids, what type of liver enzymes do they have that are responsible for metabolizing cannabinoids, what type of daily emotional and physical fluctuations are occurring that could affect how cannabis is affecting the symptoms of PD, and what is the current severity of the disease, what type of material is being used in terms of its strength and its formulation, and then the routes of administration. Is it being taken orally? Is it being inhaled? All those things need to be accounted for. And of course, one thing that a lot of the research articles that I looked at said in their conclusion was, we need more research. And obviously, this is the case. This is a picture of the UH Cancer Center down at the Kaka'ako campus. We have beautiful medical facilities that could do this kind of research. And unfortunately, we are faced with a federal conflict of the federal regulation of the state authorized use of cannabis for medical purposes that I believe should be left to the states. So let's just go through a little bit, because I'm not sure how familiar folks are with cannabis itself. These are what the seeds look like. The seeds, there is no provision under state law to obtain seeds. So this is a bit of a quandary for patients who want to use seeds to grow their own cannabis, which is allowed under state law. Right now, patients can grow up to 10 plants if they like on their private property or wherever they like. And I'm seeing a lot of patients move towards growing their own cannabis because of concerns about dispensary safety and because of a desire to grow organic medicine. The seeds are germinated into seedlings, and they go through what's called a vegetative phase, where they get about 18 hours of light, either natural or artificial, 18 hours of light a day with certain nutrients that stimulate the growth of the structure of the plant, the stems and the leaves. And typically the plants are grown to a certain size, and then the lighting is dropped to about 12 hours a day. The nutrients are changed to a balance that starts to stimulate flower production. And it's the flowers that contain the chemicals that we're interested in. And this is a specialty flowering plant. The flower is not red like a rose bush. They are green, same color as the leaves. So they're not as easily distinguishable as something like a rose petal. But under this change in growing conditions, the flowers start to develop, and they continue to develop, with the flowers accumulating in clusters that become larger and denser as the plant reaches maturity. And typically, the flowering phase takes about 2 months. Now let's zoom in a little bit and look at where these chemicals are actually being produced. This is a slightly magnified view of these flowering clusters. If we go in a little bit more, you can see that the flowers themselves are covered with what look like crystals. And these are actually very small pedunculated structures with a capsule, a sac at the end. And it is within these structures that the plant deposits the cannabinoids and the terpenes and other chemicals that are currently being investigated. It is thought that this might be some type of defense mechanism for the plant, but the cannabis plant is very unique in producing these particular chemicals. And here's an even further magnification of those structures. And so once the flowers reach maturity, they are typically harvested, which means cutting off the branches. They are trimmed of excess leaves, and they're usually allowed to dry under a controlled environment to prevent, again, any molding. And then those clusters of flowers are cut off to create smaller buds that are then usually cured under a controlled environment to allow for a consistent degree of moisture to permeate through the material, again, so that there's no molding, but also so that the material does not become too brittle or dry. And so it's these clusters of these trimmed clusters of dried flowers that are considered the buds. And these trichomes on the surface of the leaves and the flowers can also be removed to create what's called hash or kief, which is a concentrated form of these chemicals. The reason that I bring these up is because these two forms, the buds and hash, are essential for making products that patients are using. The hash or even the ground up flowers themselves can also be infused into oils that patients are taking by mouth. Now, I had to put a red box around this as well. You may have seen some of these e-cigarette cartridges in the news and floating around. I would highly recommend against these products. The oils that are going into these are not being currently regulated, and there is some concern about contaminants being introduced during their production. I would also advise against using these so-called edibles, which are being made into all types of different shapes, which of course could be enticing for children, but also again, we have chemicals being put into these products without really the proper regulation going on. And so without knowing the exact process by which these are being made, it's very difficult to speak to their safety. So I usually suggest to patients who are interested in using cannabis for medical purposes that they stick to material that's as close to the plant as possible and is minimally processed, meaning no heat or anything like that, which means basically buds or hash, which patients then can use to make their own products at home if they wish. So again, coming back to this idea of the perfect material for Parkinson's patients, we really need to do some more research in this area. I would love to be involved in research through the university where we could look at first anecdotal, perhaps come up with a strategy for looking at observational data in this patient population. But the biggest problem I'm seeing right now, especially in facilities where there is assisted living or even higher level nursing care, is that these facilities have a fear because of the federal conflict that if they allow their residents to engage in the legal state authorized use of cannabis for medical purposes, that they will lose their medical Part B reimbursement. And so this is why a lot of facilities are creating a policy that they will not allow their residents to use cannabis on the site, even if they are not smoking. There are ways to inhale cannabis without smoking or taking something by mouth, but there is this fear of losing Medicare reimbursement. And I think that patients really need to challenge such policies. I've been working for the past 8 years trying to address this issue of the federal conflict. It's a situation that our state created when it authorized the use of cannabis in Hawaii, and yet they are not going back to the federal government and trying to find a solution such as an exemption for the state authorized use in Hawaii. So I realize this is a challenging situation for patients, because if you approach the management, then that can make you a target. And so I'm hoping that maybe some of your organizations would be able to take a more active role in this area. We are in a very unique situation in Hawaii, being an island state, where we can exquisitely control the production of cannabis for specific purposes and making sure that it will not leave the state. And just for the record, I am not a supporter of recreational use. From what I've seen, this is a powerful medicine that needs to be used under medical supervision. And so my push is to get the state to protect its medical use. And again, that takes us back to the original intent of the medical cannabis bill, to promote Hawaii as being an international center for medical treatment and research, which I think could be of great benefit to patients and could also provide economic stimulus. here in Hawaii. So anyway, that's kind of a quick overview of this subject. I appreciate your attention and the opportunity to speak on this, and I welcome any questions.
Are there any questions for Dr. Otto? Julia, I have one question. Do you
Sure.
have any which symptoms are likely to respond to medical marijuana? And are you talking about THC or CBD or what?
Could you say the first part of the question? I'm sorry, I missed that.
What type of symptoms might it be useful for?
So, sure. So what type of symptoms could cannabis potentially be useful for? So that's a great topic. I could probably give an entire talk just on that, and I wanted to keep it kind of general for this initial talk. But THC has some very interesting antispasmodic properties. It's being used in multiple sclerosis patients because of the muscular rigidity that they experience. So I think it'll be interesting to explore how THC could be used in the muscular spasticity that Parkinson's patients can experience. But at the same time, THC can cause some discoordination in movement. So that could potentially make the postural instability worse. So this is something that would need to be very carefully monitored and studied in a way that would allow dosing to be approached. Of course, Parkinson's disease is a neurodegenerative disorder, and I appreciated Jerry's comments about some of these phase 1 clinical trials, because there's some very interesting research being done on the antioxidant and neuroprotective properties of CBD. And could the possible use of CBD slow down the progression of Parkinson's disease? I think this is something that really needs to be studied, but I would caution people from running out and buying CBD at the local health food store or smoke shop, because right now all of the CBD products that are being sold in Hawaii are unregulated, meaning there's no testing being done by third-party accredited labs to make sure that the products actually have what they say they have. We had some police officers several months back who had to be disciplined because they were supposedly taking an over-the-counter CBD product and they tested positive for THC. So CBD, which is being made from hemp these days, can contain up to 0.3% THC. And so that has to be properly tested. And our state still is not, they're saying that their policy has been that the only legal source of CBD right now is from the dispensaries. There is a FDA-approved variety of CBD that is available by prescription. It probably costs about $32,000 a year and will likely not be approved for Parkinson's disease because it was approved for severe pediatric seizures. And the other thing about CBD is drug interactions. These products that I'm seeing sold are not, they do not have warning labels on them, and CBD interacts with some liver enzymes that can actually slow down the metabolism of certain pharmaceutical medications, which could cause side effects if it's not known or being followed. The other issue with CBD is because we are not tracking where it's coming from, it's possible some of the CBD could be coming from illegal labs in China that are synthesizing CBD and shipping it over here in barrels. So while some of these cannabinoids have some very interesting properties that need further research, I would caution patients against running out and trying these products on their own. I would say even if somebody was interested in using CBD, it should be done under consultation with a medical professional. I'm sorry, was there another question?
No, I think there are no Tommy.
Do you know about publications that have studied what strand of cannabis ideal for this particular abnormality? Or, you know,
So I think the question was, have I found anything in the literature that looked at particular cultivars or so-called strains that might be helpful for Parkinson's symptoms? And in my initial search, I didn't find anything that looked at particular cultivars. And I think that's part of the problem right now. It's kind of like, well, the patients used cannabis, and that's just a broad category that's being applied to a variety of different products. This needs to be researched in a more rigorous fashion to not only look at the cannabinoids that are in these different cultivars, but also the terpenes themselves, the essential oils that have their own physiologic properties and can actually change the properties of THC and CBD and some of these other cannabinoids. So this is an area that's wide open for research and something that I've just started to explore myself in terms of its use for Parkinson's disease. So I look forward to learning more about that on my own.
Well, Linda, one more.
Thank you for answering my question about CBD already. But it me, one question I have, I didn't answer that very helpful for pain and for sleep, increasing sleep. But is there any hope or any in the right that the Parkinson groups will sponsor some kind of research that it's never seen take place?
So I'm sorry, I had a little difficult hearing the question, but I think your question was about, are any of these foundations going to be conducting research on this? Is that the gist of it?
I'm sorry, I wonder what the future is for CBD research by respected Parkinson's groups.
The future of CBD research by Parkinson's groups. Well, you know, aside from that one guidance on the Parkinson's Foundation website, I haven't seen any other mention about it. And, you know, I would think that CBD would be something that these foundations could start to address because, you know, a lot of places consider CBD to be legal because it's being extracted from hemp. I know.
Hey, Doc.
Yes, Jerry, sorry.
Let me help you out a little bit here because I'm an advocate with the Fox Foundation as well as an ambassador with the Parkinson Foundation.
Oh, sweet.
And so this is something that is very close on our radar that we are looking at. On the federal level, because of the dichotomy between the state and federal laws, the federal laws need to be changed to allow both the research and the usage and to bring them in consistency. So a couple things that have been done. Congressman Gabbard has been working to try to get medicinal marijuana as well as recreational marijuana legalized. Her approach was to kind of she wanted the whole enchilada, which a lot of people did not agree with. This legislative session, for the first time, there was actually a bill in the House to legalize marijuana. Finally got out of the House, but chances of it getting past the Senate are slim. The national organizations are advocating in Congress to change the law to allow for the research exactly what you're talking about, because the limited number of trials and studies that are out there are well, besides being a limited number, the results are pretty, some results are positive, some results are negative, and some come back with no results. And so they are working on the national level to try to make the environment permissible to do the research, all the stuff that you're exactly talking about. And the problems are exactly as you listed, you know, especially with the inhaled part. I will say that on the CBD issue, AARP had a really good article, I think about a year and a half ago, which I'd be more than happy to send you, that talks, it wrote down all these quality assurance problems that you detailed very, very accurately. And they give the same recommendation that you do, and unless you can tell where this stuff comes from and how it's being produced, don't do it. Just too big of issues.
Mhm.
So this, we are trying to, from the policy side, we are trying to address it. I am neither for or against medicinal marijuana. I know it has been proved in other conditions and diseases to help with a lot of the symptoms. We just don't know. And the anecdotal information that I've gotten from our movement disorder specialists, who most of them did train in California, and so they have been exposed along their career, is that some people it helps, some people it doesn't. And so it's just a big unknown, but federal law does not make the research permissive right now. And that's the problem. That's what we're trying to change.
Sure, and thanks for that federal perspective. I have been following, I think you're referring to the MORE Act, which
I am.
passed the House. My problem with the MORE Act is that it imposes a 5% federal tax on all cannabis products. And I think that the federal government should stay out of it. I think that this is something that the states have the authority to authorize, and that it should be left to the states to decide what to do with it. So what I'm proposing to the state legislature is that they file for a federal exemption with the DEA for the state authorized use of cannabis in Hawaii. There is a process by which you can file such an application. And something like this has never been tried before. The state of Iowa, their legislature, they have a medical cannabis program. And their legislature last session told their Department of Public Health that they need to get funding guarantees, that their schools and their long-term care facilities do not lose federal funding if their students and residents are using cannabis under state law. And the Iowa Medical Cannabidiol Board looked at that and came up with the same thing, a federal exemption application as a way to remove the state authorized use of cannabis from federal scheduling. And I think there's a pretty strong argument to support that type of federalism, that interaction of the state's authority to decide how controlled substances are used within the state. I also appreciate what Congresswoman Gabbard has been doing. I understand her approach, but doing something at the federal level, changing federal law, as we all know, is a huge undertaking. The federal exemption that I'm proposing is an administrative remedy that does not require any changes to state or federal law. And the Iowa Department of Public Health is currently drafting their federal exemption application. I've heard that they're probably going to wait to see when the next president is installed before they submit this application, hoping for a more favorable environment. But I'm approaching this from a states' rights point of view. Even if Congress were to say remove cannabis from Schedule 1 and say put it in Schedule 3, where a lot of people want it to be in terms of banking and research, that is only going to help the pharmaceutical companies who want to do research and produce FDA-approved products that can be sold across the country. Now, it will also help with banking, but cannabis produced in Hawaii will never be FDA approved because it is not put through that process, and because it does not need FDA approval because it is not for interstate use. So Hawaii could develop its own intra-state program where it was producing FDA quality cannabis medical products for use strictly within the state, and produce products that we know are safe because they're being properly regulated, and make it available to patients, possibly even being covered by local medical insurance. So that's the approach I'm taking.
One of the interesting twists for an interstate is if you move the products from island to island, you go into federal territory, you get outside. And so that creates this additional layer of difficulty that we have that
Sure.
most states don't have.
And exactly, we're very unique in that respect. But what most people don't realize is there's a federal aviation regulation, 14 CFR 91.19, that specifically exempts the carriage of marijuana aboard aircraft if it's authorized under state law. That's been on the books for decades. And we tried to get an amendment to Hawaii's Medical Cannabis Act that would specifically protect the ability of patients to transport their allowable amounts of cannabis between the islands. And Governor Ige vetoed that bill. It made it all the way to his desk. And he said one of his reasons was because it violated federal law. And yet, our Medical Cannabis Act allows dispensaries to transport material between islands for testing purposes. So how can you allow one group to transport between islands and not another? And this is one of the ongoing problems that we're facing because of this whole federal conflict.
Yeah, no, agreed, sir.
Awesome. No, it's a great discussion. I really appreciate your involvement at that level.
All right, are there any further, you have a question? No. All right, thank you very much, Dr. Otto.
Well, thank you. And I do have my contact information there. So if you have any additional questions, please feel free to contact me, and hope you all stay safe and have a great holiday season.
Thank you.
Thanks, Doc.